From Pacifica Radio, this is Democracy Now!
On the President's order, coalition forces began the ground war to disarm Iraq and liberate the Iraqi people. Our objective is to bring down a regime that threatens the American people with weapons of mass destruction and to secure Iraq's oil fields.
Today, a year-end conversation, 2003, a year of war, abroad and at home.
2004 has just arrived here in Australia, and I'm hoping it's going to be a lot better for the Iraqi people and for the people of Afghanistan and for other peoples that have found themselves the subject of the kind of imperial violence that so characterized 2003.
2003, we've seen the continuation of a raging war on civilians, and we wonder now, will 2004 bring a change to that tide or a continuation?
I think it's really important at the end of this year now to reflect on some of the people in our midst who are really, to my mind, neglected prophets when it comes to war. And I'm thinking now of the Vietnam veterans who came home, turned against that war, who are against this war, and who, in some of them, who are against all wars.
There was plenty of good news for women in 2003. It wasn't all doom and gloom.
Today, Katha, Pollitt, Aarti Shahani, Michael Parenti, John Pilger, Noam Chomsky, Martina Espada. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. To fight the spread of mad cow disease, the U.S. government is now barring the sale of meat from cows that are too sick to walk or stand. This comes just weeks after Republican congressional leaders rejected a similar ban after it came under pressure from the meat industry. The Food and Drug Administration also announced a bar on food manufacturers using the small intestine from cattle in food for humans. A total of 32 countries have been banned the importation of U.S. beef since last week, when the government announced the discovering of a cow suffering from mad cow disease. The Pentagon on Tuesday stripped Halliburton of its role in importing of gasoline into Iraq. This comes weeks after it was revealed that a Halliburton subsidiary had overcharged the government $61 million on fuel purchases. The Pentagon claimed yesterday's decision was not connected. A Defense Department agency will temporarily take over the job of importing fuel until new contracts are signed. In Iraq, at least 2 people are dead, 10 wounded during protests over a Kurdish bid for control of the city of Kirkuk. Kurds on Iraq's U.S.-appointed governing council are proposing that a future federal Iraqi government grant the Kurds broad autonomy in the northern zone, with Kirkuk at its capital. Attorney General John Ashcroft has removed himself from the investigation into who within the Bush administration exposed the name of a CIA agent. The agent's name was Valerie Plame. She was the wife of a former U.S. diplomat, Joseph Wilson. The leak came shortly after Wilson charged that President Bush had misled the country by stating Iraq attempted to buy uranium from the African country of Niger. Wilson had personally traveled to Niger in 2002 on a CIA-sponsored trip and found that there was no Iraq-Niger connection. The Justice Department announced on Tuesday that Chicago's top federal prosecutor, U.S. Attorney Patrick Fitzgerald, would now lead the investigation. The Wall Street Journal reports Ashcroft's decision to step aside casts the spotlight on Bush's top advisor, Karl Rove, who's already been questioned by the FBI. For over a decade, Rove served as an advisor to Ashcroft. Between 1984 and 1994, Ashcroft paid Karl Rove's company nearly $750,000 for offering direct mail services to Ashcroft's campaigns in Missouri for governor and senator. Earlier this year, Wilson said he hoped to see Karl Rove frog-marched out of the White House for his role in the leak that exposed his wife. We talked to Ambassador Joseph Wilson yesterday, a few minutes after the announcement, to hear his reaction.
I argued from the very beginning that I thought that the government would find, the administration would find it in its own best interest to take a good hard look at the question of Mr. Ashcroft recusing himself, given relations that he's had with senior members of the administration in previous political lives. Principally because it seems to me that whatever the outcome is, whether they decide that a crime may have been committed or not, that outcome is more credible if there is not the perception of a potential conflict of interest.
Can you talk about what that conflict of interest is?
Well, I know only what I've read about Mr. Rove's political advising group or lobbyists working on some of Mr. Ashcroft's campaigns in the past. Mr. Rove is as a key administration official, and as I've said repeatedly, I have reason to believe that at a minimum he pushed the story. And so that would make him, I think, somebody who would be around this investigation. And I don't know about other relationships that Mr. Ashcroft may have had with other people in the White House, but I wouldn't be surprised, given that he's a senior Republican, that he has other potentially relationships that are potentially conflictual.
Would you still like to see Karl Rove frog marched out of the White House and handcuffed?
Look, I have every reason to believe that Karl Rove and the Office of Communications both pushed this story for a week. Now, pushing the story may not have been technically illegal, but it was certainly sleazy. And for an administration which came to office promising to restore dignity and honor to the White House and change the tone in Washington, I cannot believe that that's the way that the president wanted to change the tone. So, yeah, I mean, I think that at a minimum it was ethically challenged to do that. Let me be charitable and put it that way. And the people who are on the public payroll and abuse their authority and their responsibility that way should be fired.
Ambassador Joseph Wilson responding to the news that Attorney General John Ashcroft has recused himself from the investigation into who in the White House exposed the CIA operative Valerie Plame, Joseph Wilson's wife.
On the President's order, coalition forces began the ground war to disarm Iraq and liberate the Iraqi people. Our objective is to bring down a regime that threatens the American people with weapons of mass destruction and to secure Iraq's oil fields and resources which belong to the Iraqi people and which they will need to develop their country after decades of neglect by the Iraqi regime.
Campaign of, quote, shock and awe, as the Defense Department calls it, is underway against Iraq. It's not the ultimate all-out air campaign, but it's big, it's huge, some would say humongous.
Because this division has so much armor and firepower, it is sometimes called the
Pillars, part of the 3rd Infantry Brigade, had charged across the desert in a formation 4 kilometers wide. This was hard, relentless driving, taking the column 120 miles deep inside Iraq.
aircraft and ships. That is an enormous amount of weaponry.
Never has a mechanized force moved so fast and so far.
U.S. troops needed to get there first, secure those oil fields, and explosions and anti-aircraft fire have also been reported around Mosul, a strategic oil region.
Operating day or night, these troops combine their tank power with batteries of howitzers and multiple launch rocket systems. Unlike Desert Storm, this is a highly mobile, high-tech division loaded with the newer model.
Never has a mechanized force moved so fast and so far.
The Soul Savers, Closer, in a music video produced by the Guerrilla News Network, here on Democracy Now!, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. As 2003 comes to a close, a smaller number of stories dominate the headlines and newscasts of major media outlets. The Michael Jackson and Koby Bryant cases, the mad cow scare, the 9 Democratic candidates for president verbally assaulting one another. But there is one word that characterizes 2003 more than any other: war. The war abroad and the war at home. On the international front, as the Bush administration expands its occupation and war in Afghanistan, it intensified its